Hello, welcome back to another exciting episode of Homestuck Rewritten, Episode 6. This episode will be another long two-parter examining Act 5, Act 2 of Homestuck. Again, we've brought on Momo and Daft. Now, of course, I have the customary recap. Act 5, Act 2 represents not only Homestuck's longest arc so far, but the peak of Homestuck's popularity. Many things in the last four acts have been building to this point, and Act 5-2 is the culmination of them. The culminations come in the form of Murderstuck as well as Cascade, the largest Flash animation to date, and The Flash That Crashed Newgrounds. Act 5.2 resumes after Hivebent, weaving the stories of the trolls and the humans together for one main goal. Initiate the Scratch. And beat Bec Noir, but that's two goals, but that's fine. On their way to this end, many things happen. Many things. If you haven't read Homestuck already, this recap will be incomprehensible. First of all, we see the trolls being attacked by Bec Noir. How he arrived in their game session is still a mystery. For now, they retreat into a ring of meteors called the Veil. Bec then wreaks havoc on their session, destroying Prospect and Durst and trying to kill everyone. You know, like you do. Many, not all of the trolls, begin to pester the kids as an act of misguided revenge. Previously, Jade's dream self died saving John's dream self on Skaya, so when she falls asleep, she now wakes up inside of the Dream Bubbles, the Homestuck Afterlife First Bird players. The trolls begin to find their trolling partners. Vriska pairs with John, Terezi with Dave, Jade with Tavros, and Rose with Kanaya, though the former three all get bothered by Carcat in equal measure. Jade is also finally inside of the game and has to deal with her dog becoming the Colonel Sprite. This has adverse effects on the lands. John, after ectobiologizing himself and his friends, as well as their guardians, awakens jettisoned on his land in the middle of an oil lake. Bro, who has been battling Bec Noir, moves their fight to John's land and gets aid from Dave Sprite. Bro dies, Dave Sprite loses a wing, and John's oil lake catches fire due to Bec Noir's new god dog powers that Bec inadvertently gave him through Jade's sprite. If this is confusing, just hold on tight. John awakens his powers and does the windy thing, and then falls asleep and fucking dies. Except he doesn't, and now he's immortal, but only a little bit. It's revealed that this process, god tiering, is also something that Vriska went through in her own session after a savage beating of revenge by Aradia. After an offer from Tavros to use his animal mind control on Bec to take care of Bec Noir, he reveals that he was responsible for killing Jade's grandpa years ago. Oops! Kanaya and Jade begin to chat, as they filled the same roles in both of their sessions, which was a quest involving frog breeding that births a new universe. Again, hang on tight. This is the main goal of the game, and Jade gets Dave to help since Dave has time powers, and as such isn't under the same time constraint due to the early reckoning. Meanwhile, Rose is wrecking shit, really being a girl boss, trying to break the session to buck their unfortunate circumstance. Kanaya and Aradia both try to dissuade her, but to no avail. She also starts talking to her creepy uncle with a cue ball head. John, now on Skaya, follows his dad and Rose's mom, but he also extracts something called the tumor from inside of Skaya. This is important later. Rose continues to talk to her creepy uncle and learns that her mom fucking died. This makes her angry, so she turns grimdark, which is something that you can do in Homestuck. She flies to Skaya and finds both John and her dead parents. Sadly, they also find Bec Noir, who fucking kills them. John comes back to life, but Rose does not, and John has to use a corpse smooch to awaken her dream self, which now acts like another game like another life in a video game. I really pity anyone who is listening to this and has not read Homestuck. I'm so sorry. John flies to Dave's land and starts the scratch by dragging a needle from a big monster across the beat mesa, which is the thing that I don't have time to explain. Remember the Carapacians? They're still kicking around. Basically, what happens is they have one of two super special rings that will become important way later. Meanwhile, in the Trolls meteor, Jack is on a rampage and kills Durst. This awakens Aradia as a god tier, who then uses Beck's body to teleport into the green sun, which is something you can do in Homestuck, I guess. Also on the meteor, Vriska is bitching it up and reveals she was instrumental in creating Beck Noir to Tavros. Tavros is pissed and comes to kill her, but sadly, he sucks, so he dies like a bitch. Terezi soon finds the body, because it falls directly behind her, and believes it's Vriska's fault, which she's correct about. A bunch of other murders happen, both by Gamzee and Aridin, all of which Terezi blames Vriska for. This culminates in the deaths of Equius, Pfeffery, Dear Sweet Nepeta, Solix, sort of, as well as Kanaya, also sort of, who turns into a fucking vampire, which you can do in Homestuck. All of these murders culminate on the roof, where Karkat calms down Gamzee, Kanaya kills Aridin, and then later on, Terezi kills Vriska. Then there's a whole bunch of shit with the ancestors, which we're not going to go there. I'm so sorry. There's also a bunch of dumb crap with Doc Scratch and Spade Slick, but I won't worry about that now. Just know that Doc Scratch is Lord English and has to get some errands done before he transforms, like creating the green sun, by tricking everybody. To round things out, Dave and Rose go on a suicide mission to deliver the tumor to blow something up, but they actually live and create the green sun, which lights the way for the trolls to zip on over to it. Also during the scratch, Jade grabs the 4 lands and John and some other random crap, shrinks it, and zips out, avoiding them being erased during the scratch. Also at some point, Jade became a god tier, but a dog. All of the trolls meet up at the Green Sun along with Dave and Rose, and then they go to the new session along with Jade and the ship. Anyway, that's Fact 5.2. If it was confusing, I'm sorry, but I assure you, this does mean something to the people who have read the comic. I missed a lot here, especially with the Carapacians and the Ancestors, so I'm very sorry, but this is a recap, not a retelling. With that out of the way, however, let's enjoy the show. Once again, Funk McLovin with the pod. Let's talk about Act 5.2. Last time we talked about Act 5.1, which was like very short in terms of pages, but very long in terms of what we needed to discuss. And now we can talk about Act 5.2. I don't know how recently you guys have read this, but I reread most of it in preparation for this, and then watched like a very comprehensive summary video online. Just Google Homestuck summarized. Very good stuff. But first we'll go around and I'll just ask everyone, what did you guys think of this? We'll start with Janai and go from left to right.
You mean what did I think of like Act 5.2 generally speaking?
Yeah, because this is like the first part of Homestuck that is Homestuck. You know what I mean?
So this is the part of the comic when I read it where it first like really grabbed me, because like my route into Homestuck was a little weird. I watched like a bunch of like fan made like MEPs and shit, so I had like vague senses of these characters, but like no idea who they were. And like I think I tried to watch Cascade at one point without having any context, and I'm like, this is cool, what the fuck is happening? And then like this was the part where like, oh, okay, like now I have the context for all this. So like I really enjoy this part of the comic. There's definitely some stuff that I think needs to be addressed that we'll get to. But like generally speaking, this is where for me it started getting like really, really super interesting, and like it really started to engage with characters that I like care a lot about. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. For me, this is probably going to be a process of like refining more than like ripping shit apart completely, but we'll get into it.
What about you, Daft Punk?
Okay, when Vriska says that she's responsible for making Jack Nor a it says a lot about her as a person. Like, oh my god. Uh, like this, I think that part where she creates Jack Nor in order to give herself a challenge, or I believe those are her words, is definitely a very interesting look into her character, and it's like the first. It's the very first inkling that suggests there's kind of a lot going on with this character. And then there's also some, when Dave and Rose talk about the suicide mission. I thought it was very sweet that Dave didn't want Rose to do it by herself, so he went with her. But that's about the sweetest you're ever gonna get from Dave Strider.
Yeah, those are important parts.
Ultimately, there's kind of a lot. Yeah, there's a lot going on in Act 5, Part 2, but it's ultimately all set up for the absolute fucking monster that is Act 6, and in my opinion, the most interesting act in Homestuck. But, you know.
I've already spoken. All I have to add is, like I said, this is where Homestuck is. This is what Homestuck is to many people, including, especially online. People remember this part of Homestuck, both people who were archival readers and people who were, at the time readers. What do you have to say, Momo?
If you consider Homestuck as a webcomic that people are meant to experience and enjoy, then this is the part where it's like most rewarding to engage with like that. Like it's very satisfying. You benefit from having paid attention and cared and invested yourself in this part of the narrative, because it's some of the most successful, just on a basic narrative level. It follows all the steps, it checks all the boxes, it's very, very strong. And it created a legacy that I think has made things pretty complicated for what happened after.
Yeah, I agree. You're talking about Act 6, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And et cetera.
And et cetera. We shall not speak its name.
We shall leave it at that.
And then finally, Bucky, you kind of get the easiest and hardest job by speaking last, but go on.
Oh, cool. God, the first time I engaged with it, I was 15, and I've reread it more recently, but I've stated this previously, and again, the separation of time between those reads influenced a lot, but I do agree it's very satisfying. I did find it, there are moments where it is presented in such a way that is either confusing or does warrant some level of, like, either deep thought or, like, outside explanation, and I think some of the places we'll approach it, we will be, as Janaya mentioned, refining it, but also, like...
God, yeah, you're right.
It works for a first draft, but it also worked in part for me because there was a large community dedicated to explaining what the hell was going on in Homestuck. And that's not a strength in a...
No, I totally agree. I want to clarify this because I actually wrote it down in my own notes. What I wrote down, I don't know if you necessarily agree with this, but it seems like you were getting at something similar, where it's very confusing if you're not a update reader. Like, reading it as a reader later on, I could see how it would be confusing, because it both has too much detail in that, like, there are too many fucking pages, but then at the same time, there's not enough detail, because the Flash animations are all dialogueless. They don't have any, like, clarifying stuff, so you are just expected to realize, like, what the fuck everything is.
Yeah, and they do, and I think that is good in a piece of art, and to some extent that, like, you need to... watching it multiple times yields more information, and it is difficult as an archive... You're right, it's difficult as an archive reader to remember what it was like to have, like, some of these things were dropped with, like, a long wait after them, or if not a long wait, at least a few days for people to, like, obsessively analyze it and draw as many little details as quickly as possible. Which is the great thing about fandom update culture. That's not exclusive to Homestuck.
That's true.
That happens in many places. But, yeah. it's a different experience, and I think that I don't know. Homestuck would benefit to some extent in some places of Cascade's in a good spot because it's at the end of an act, and you can sort of watch it and go, okay, well, that's the end of this act, plus this little, like, coda thing, or, like, the intermission where Doc Scratch, becomes Lord English. Those two, that's, like, just a little last flash before we, like, firmly go into Act 6. Like, those being at, like, good stopping points was nice, but I don't know. Sometimes there's just a whole lot in one big chunk of Homestuck where where you need a little bit of breathing room to stop and think about it. And the comic shouldn't have to put up a big sign that says, hey, you should stop here and, like, think about the themes for a bit before continuing. But it's nice to have that every so often.
It's like a gameplay loop, but in a story, like a story loop. Especially when this is a piece of literature, I think it would benefit from having, like, ups and downs like that.
I think this was the first part where I really, like, started to bring in, like, outside, like, reading about the stuff that was happening to, like, get some more context for world building and stuff too. Like, it wasn't necessarily, like, as someone who was reading it all in one go, like, I maybe didn't sit long enough with some of that stuff to fully absorb it, and I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck is happening here? So that definitely could have been improved upon. Like, I think that's primarily a pacing issue, but, like, establishment as well is maybe not the best.
Beyond the plot stuff, or the general stuff rather, we should talk about the actual plot stuff. And I think the main thing to speak about with Act 5.2 in the broad sense is the Scratch. Like, what is it? What mechanics are needed for it? I think the Scratch as an idea is good because I think Hussey is talented at making, like, questions that get answers later, or plot points that pay off in some way, because you can kind of see him having a point A and then a point B and then writing himself between them. And I think in this it's like he knows what point A is, which is they're in a doomed session, and he knows what point B is, which is the Scratch, which is a big reset. And then this whole act is him writing point A to point B, basically, in the most convoluted, fucked up, squiggly line possible. What do you guys have to say about that?
I was going to say that I think that, like, the Scratch kind of, like, there's a recurring theme of, like, basically failure and retrying stuff in Homestuck. Like, we get the first sort of big taste of that with, like, with the Doom timeline stuff in Act 3 ? I think it was 3. The stuff with Dave and the Doom timeline. And then, like, Suburb itself is kind of themed around that, in the sense of, like, making a new universe and wiping away the old one, all that good shit. But, like, we kind of get, like, small, medium, large when it goes from, the original Doom timeline stuff, and then you've got the Scratch, and then you've got the big game over thing, and then, that kind of, like, those all have, like, narrative echoes, which I think is cool. So yeah, I think that's effective, and I think that it's important to establish what the Scratch is and, like, build up to it, which I actually think the comic does a decent job of. Like, I think this is absolutely one of the tightest written parts of Homestuck. Not without problems, but, like, especially if you know what the fuck is going on, it's pretty focused. It doesn't ramble quite as much as Act 6, which, like, I liked Act 6, but it gets very lost in the.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to expand? Also, specifically some plot points. The Scratch is obviously something that the trolls can see happening, so the humans know in advance. And there's a couple of mechanics that go along with it. I'll just refresh the audience real quick. There's the green sun, which, obviously they think they need to blow up with the tumor. And the tumor is something inside of Skaya that John excavates. But later they find out that the tumor makes the green sun. And then the flip side of that is the Scratch will reset a game and erase all of the stuff in the medium. So not only do they have to do it, but they have to also get out in time. So that's sort of the central thing. Does anyone have anything? Who's got something?
I do not like the Scratch.
You don't like the Scratch? Interesting. Go continue.
No, I don't like the Scratch.
I tent my fingers.
Generally, doing a full world reset in a long-running piece of fiction is a highly contentious idea to pull off. And given the way people reacted to the retcon in Act 6, I generally think this sort of thing is a very hard thing to sell unless you have something really, really planned out. Hussey could have done it. It happened in Problem Sleuth, I am aware. But I think the problem with the way the retcons are generally handled in Homestuck... Well, this is just... I actually shouldn't get into my problems with the retcon stuff because it's not important to this act. But generally speaking, the biggest problem I had with, like, generally the Scratch in general is that it only really pertains to the players of Suburb. We've spoken on this podcast about how no one outside... There's basically... It's just the trolls and the kids. Like, a lot of this is done without consideration for the outside world in general. They just decided to completely destroy an entire universe because their session didn't go well. At the time, I thought that was a really bad idea and that it was really shitty and awful, but just because of that, just because of the potential world that we have never seen, for all of those people that we didn't know, it's such a hideously disgusting idea.
Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Homestuck is what it is, you know.
Yeah. I think that is a... So, I agree. I didn't think of that. That there are other players of Spurb that are implied to also be erased to make way for the new universe. Because Karkat does say that, like, your universe is fucked up because I gave it cancer, which implies that any Suburb session, not just the ones that we follow, would have fucked up. And it is Jack Noir's... Jack Noir comes from the human session specifically, not any of the other sessions that we know transpired, like the Hat Guy, the Gent of Pisses session, which is something I'm surprised at myself for saying in a serious manner in this time. However... it's serious business indeed. I didn't think of that. You could either solve that by acknowledging it, or you could solve it by saying something else happens, because it's kind of unclear what happens when the Scratch happens, because Jake exists before the Scratch, which says, okay, the Scratch is predestined. So does that mean that the Scratch erases the past universe, or does it mean that it just bifurcates the universe, and so there are these two things? What's going on?
So I know, like, there's a lot of weird, like, timeline-y shit, and, like, the idea of kind of what's predestined to happen. I kind of like the idea that the Scratch is sort of this, like, it's part of the alpha timeline. Like, it's something that, you know, is going to happen, and then, like, again, that this comes back to like, it all kind of comes up to the retcon, where they get to the point where that alpha timeline, and, like, I don't know how much of this is actually in canon. I know some people in the comments were like, oh, that's not how it worked in the original, and I don't care. This is how it's going to work the way I see it, is that the retcon is the point where you've reached an inevitable point in the alpha timeline where it dead ends in this failure that you can't escape from. There's no time travel, there's no resetting the session. It's completely fucked. And then you have these, like, narrative, you know, the ability to reset the narrative, which goes outside of the universe, and it goes outside of the text itself, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to play around with. So, like, I do think the Scratch can be very effective where it is, and I think that the whole idea that you're basically, like, you know, blowing away this entire universe to try again is, like, it's a very interesting concept, and, like, I maybe having the characters, like, react more to that, I think, would probably be good. rather than it being just like a matter of fact, like that's the thing we did.
We're running into essentially the very core ideologies of Homestuck, because everything that we're encountering is this pattern that keeps repeating in and out and up and down of the narrative. In the commentary, Hussey explained it as, you've got Mario, and Mario dies in a pit, but then, the next Mario goes on and learns from the pit death to, not die in that spot. So we have all these dead timelines, all these flawed, expressions of reality, and I do think that is Homestuck's opinion, that these are flawed expressions of reality, coming in to feed the Alpha timeline, which is, this supremic timeline. That's sort of a weird philosophy. All these dead universes, all these other dead characters, they say, oh yeah, you definitely matter, but only so much that you are, subsumed or invalidated inherently by the presence of, this one existence of the story. Homestuck knew, it would be at one point finished. Time is flat in Homestuck. Everything has already happened, and everything has happened in the same time. So what's happened with the Scratch, specifically in Skya? Those two different portals that sent the Guardians versus the players were swapped, changing who was the players and who was the Guardians. This is just... the events have been changed themselves in this universe. Otherwise, it's physically the same space, in the sense of matter, but it's this different iteration.
Yeah, and we can get into that more when we get into retcons. But I think you hit on something, that there are 3 main resets in Homestuck that sort of ramp up in intensity. And the first being what we talked about before, where Dave had to come back in time and fix his prototyping. We have now the Scratch, which is a reset of the universe and the Spurb session. And then, of course, we have the retcon, which is the main one. And they all kind of build up into that. But we can't talk about the Scratch itself without talking about Doc Scratch. And I talked before about point A and point B. Hussey, in this part, also sets up a point A to a much later point B, which is obviously killing Lord English, in this part where Doc Scratch starts to do things. I don't really have many thoughts about Doc Scratch. I think he's fine as a villain. I like that about him. I don't think he has much to do other than influencing stuff. So I would appreciate if you guys had some thoughts on that. Apparently Bucky has something to say. Is that true?
It's interesting running up against, this is sort of a continuation of earlier, but also involves Doc Scratch. It's interesting running up against the stuff that you need to have in order to keep the narrative going with the themes that it's already presented, and also have an effective villain, and also the stuff that just kind of sucks to deal with, to put it lightly. Regarding Doc Scratch, there is a continued... There is the position of, I hate to say this, but very snooty Freudian, not quite father figure, but, weird about father imagery villain that keeps cropping up in Homestuck. And, Doc Scratch does occupy that for a good chunk of Homestuck, but the Hussey self-insert does it a little bit. And then there are other characters that sortingly do it, and then Dirk picks up that mantle in Homestuck, in the epilogues in Homestuck Squared. And it's a weird role that, just keeps coming up over and over again, and I don't know what that says, but it's there.
The evil daddy.
And that's the observation I have about
the Jordan
Doc Scratch,
Peterson.
mostly. Yeah, you said it. Yes.
Oh,
the Rick Sanchez.
Yeah. I agree. I think that... I agree in that, that's a weird thing. I don't really know what to make of it. But I think it is useful to have... Because what you have in Act 5.2 is, a very man versus nature situation, where human beings are coming up against the laws of nature, or, in this case, the laws of Spurb, and trying to make something out of it and prevail. And... Doc Scratch adds a very man versus man aspect to it of who is this guy? Can we trust him? He's bad. He's we know from Spade Slick talking to him that he is the villain of the Midnight Crew. Yeah. Who else has some Doc Scratch thoughts? I try to think about him as little as possible myself.
He is responsible for um the okay, so he says that he's responsible for turning Alternia into the violent death world that it is. He has Damara chained up in his basement
He sure does.
or something. He's very, very overtly the devil of Homestuck.
The devil, that's huge, yes.
The comments around him heavily imply that he is a pedophile, if I may be so blunt.
Yeah. I mean, he's not he's not real. He's not going to get offended if you say that, so don't worry.
Right. He's seen talking with Gamzee, Friska, and Rose. He also speaks to Jade and Kanaya and Terezi.
He speaks to Karkat once. He just taunts Karkat for some reason because he's a jackass.
The guy is very much not good, and if you're paying attention to the way I heard that a lot of people hated the way he spoke at the time, which confused me because at the time he read no different to me than the narrative did. Take that for what it is.
Oh. Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you have all these metaphors that are loaded on to the main antagonist core of Homestuck, Lord English and Doc Scratch, of inevitability and imperialism and fate and destiny as being all these bad things. You have this core structure that validates that, and you also associate him with all these like creepy, overbearing, abusive and paternalistic sensibilities. And like, what does that connection mean for this guy? And then what does it sort of imply if you don't usurp that in some meaningful way?
Yeah. I guess you could say he represents, like, in Act 5 at least, not later on, but he represents a necessary evil. The sort of, like Daft said, the devil. Someone who not just who is evil, but someone you have to sort of reckon with in some way because of how he eggs on Rose and Vriska, but in some ways he actually helps them in earnest. And obviously that's to further his own goals, but the goals do line up, and you get the very strong sense that they only line up because, like, Doc Scratch needs them to line up for some reason, and that creates a sense of foreboding.
That's because Homestuck characters, not merely Suburb players, but specifically Homestuck characters, the protagonists, are servants of Lord English, all of them. Whether or not they recognize this or don't recognize this is true of their situation.
Gamzee is the only character who 100% acknowledges and lives by this role regardless of whether they want to do it or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I think that I like the role that Doc Scratch plays in the story as the kind of like the devil figure or part of the devil figure, because there's several devils in Homestuck, and like it's a very interesting character. The sort of like behind the scenes manipulation is very interesting, and that's again that sense of inevitability where you're getting to the rise of Lord English, and like it also ties very much into like the idea of like the narrative inevitability. Like Doc Scratch is often either subsumes the narrative or sort of like stands in for it. But like I think one of the things that's sort of like gonna be a thread going down is like let me put this, the way that Doc Scratch functions within the story as far as like perception, because you mentioned something about like I don't remember who it was that mentioned how do you like basically how do you reconcile this like paternalistic kind of like imperialist, there's a lot of shit going on there, and I think that part of the way that that's read within the text has to do with other extensions of like what the result of that is. So like I think because we've talked in the past about like treating some of these characters with more compassion, like Gamzee being a big example, and like showing a side of the characters that's like, okay, maybe they are doing bad things because they're being manipulated into it, or maybe they, you know, were traumatized and are reacting in a certain way, but like the character themselves is not like this just irredeemably awful person. And I think that that will then kind of reflect back on Scratch, because like Scratch's view is that all of this is, you know, this is the way it's supposed to be. And if you show a contrasting depiction of characters where Scratch says one thing or presents things in a certain way, and then you're shown through narrative subtext that actually there's more going on there, that works to subvert what Doc Scratch represents. So, like, it's not enough to just show, you know, paternalistic imperialism. Like, that's you're just describing a thing that exists. If you want to make a statement about it, which I think that we do, then you if you can show a subversion of that, and like, oh, you know, Doc Scratch sees Gamzee as a tool to be manipulated in the service of the, you know, the facilitation of this inevitable outcome. But if we see a side of that character that shows that there's more going on there, then that helps to undermine the what's the word? Not validity. Sort of like that. The validity of Doc Scratch's position within the narrative. Like there's another undercurrent of something, you know, more I guess kind. And like in Homestuck as canon, we don't really get that, especially with post canon, because it's like it's just kind of like, nah, actually that's just kind of how things are.
Right.
And it's gonna just continue.
Right, because I'll be quick. So yeah, like what happens when we bridges these is we create this kind of fractal expansion of all the conflicts in Homestuck, and Doc Scratch being paternal means that, you know, the frictions, the generational frictions that you might have between yourself and your society are the same as the existential frictions with reality. Man versus man and man versus nature are effectively the same. But this does naturalize, you know, the position of the villains, and like normalizes it as an essential part of reality. And how you deal with that later is, you know, it can really make or break where a story lands.
What I thought of was, like I said at the top of this discussion, I don't really know what I make of Doc Scratch, really. And I think I do now, at least in this rewrite. He is a representative of inevitability, and he is not that in Homestuck, even though Hussey wants him to be, because Hussey doesn't really know how to reckon with inevitability. Because Hussey treats inevitability with like, all right, everything is inevitable, and everything needs to happen due to this inevitability, but I don't really like that. And in our rewrite, we can say that, like, Doc Scratch is a stand-in for, like, the bittersweetness of inevitability, of you know what you must do, but you might not necessarily like it. And that would build to later struggles of inevitability being genuinely poisonous that could culminate in game over. And he is also a stand-in of society, like Momo said, like the old world, sort of, the expectations of an older person. He could speak on issues that now would not affect them now that they're out of society. Like he could say, like, he could misgender June or something, something like that. Or like call Rose sweetheart, or say she should smile more, or some signifier that he represents that person.
I think
what did you have to
it's
say?
already there with like, look at his house, look at his clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like he looks like fucking Colonel Sanders without
Colonel
a beard.
Sanders.
I mean, Andrew is sitting
Yeah.
in Carnegie's mansion, Andrew Carnegie's mansion. So yeah.
Yeah, so actually, what you were saying about inevitability, I'm kind of like being something for me. So, like, I think that one of the interesting things about like the narrative structure of Homestuck, and something that we're getting to the point where we really have to think about, is, you know, it has this concept of like the inevitable, and that like this is the inevitable outcome of a situation, but like the thing about that is that it's inevitable within the context of a of a story, of a fictional world that is set up in a certain way. Like this is not naturally occurring. It is something that is created, and like while the parameters exist to make a certain outcome inevitable, what happens when we get to the retcon is like, it's kind of like, hey, if you want to play around with like meta narrative horseshit, then like go all the way with it, and you've got this inevitable outcome based on the starting parameters of your story and the characters within it and all of their capability to act within the confines of the narrative. And then what the retcon does is it changes those parameters just enough that it gives the characters this way out of this inevitable outcome. So like again, it's like I think this is something that Homestuck like plays around with, but it does a decent job within Homestuck of kind of getting to that point. But then like Epilogues in Homestuck 2 is like, nah, it was all fake. It's all inevitable anyway, I guess. Like it kind of like, it's like you getting out and then the gravity pulls you back in. And it's like, I don't love that. I think that's very like, it's bleak in a way that I don't think works for me. I know we're not talking about post-canon in this rewrite, but like I think that you can make a very explicit statement about like, again, a concept of like, one thing that I'm really big on with writing is the concept of hope being an underlying theme where like things can get incredibly bad and it doesn't mean that you're just fucked forever. And I think that that's something that can be treated on a very like holistic way if you start to
The only
acknowledge
hope...
it. Yeah, no, go ahead, Momo. You got good thoughts on this, so.
The only hope that exists in Homestuck is the Obama campaign kind of hope.
Yeah, exactly. It's a false like performative kind of hope where it's like, well, you've got the vote for the least bad option kind of
It's
outcome.
hope within like a box of American patriotism, essentially.
Exactly.
Like,
That makes me sad, but you're right.
That's my job.
Fuck.
It's a story that, in spite of like Homestuck as a work, and I include post-canon in this, is a story that in spite of all of its pretense about meta-narrative and structural stuff and like going beyond the boundaries of narrative frameworks, it cannot imagine the destruction of the systems that it creates. Like it is
true.
Inevitably
Holy
bound
shit.
to its own restrictions. Like it never gets to the point of fully acknowledging that the systems that it sets up are bad and that they should be destroyed and can be destroyed.
I agree. I think that's a good segue into the next part that I wrote down, which is we've talked about how Homestuck has like framed these, for lack of a better word, neoliberal sentiments, with respect to like Doc Scratch and Skaya, etc. But how does this affect the actual characters? Being in this part, the trolls and the humans. Again, a refresher for the audience more than anyone here. In this, the actual specific like character stuff we'll get into in the next episode of this part. But just broadly, there's the revenge cycle with Arati of Vriska, Terezi, and Tavros. There's the ancestor shit, which will be explicitly in a bonus episode. And then prepping for the Scratch on the human side. And part of that being Dave and Rose's suicide quest. I'll start out with... We'll go right to left this time. Bucky, what do you have to say about the specifics of this part?
This was the longest section of Homestuck that we had so far. This is like the classic era of Homestuck, if you will, where like the troll and human interactions were ramping up, and people were really into like looking forward to more of some very specific interactions, and there was very little of each character, so every little nugget of information at the time got very flanderized in fanfiction very quickly. And it's because a lot of the flanderization happened before the end of Murderstuck too, although we were like leading up to it, so that was also interesting. But I think I don't have like that's one of the most beloved parts of Homestuck watching these human troll interactions and watching the trolls interact with each other, and that's why Murderstuck works pretty well, is because it like very quickly falls apart and you're like, oh no, I was enjoying that. It's really bad now. What the fuck? Oh my god. I think that works pretty well, so I don't have a lot of like changes I would make to this because it's important for establishing something later.
That's valid for a rewrite, you know. This is a rewrite, not a rewrite from whole cloth, or a write from whole cloth, so keeping a lot of that stuff is fine. And like you said, I think the most poignant thing is this is when the trolls were finally cut loose into the larger.
There's a lot of mystery
cast.
surrounding them, and it's very interesting to see that mystery start to unravel.
Oh yeah, even after Hivebent, yeah.
This is such a cool. I don't want to change anything in here. Not that I can remember. This is like a really cool part where the turns sort of the tables turn for the the tables turn for the trolls, and suddenly they're kind of on the other side of the humans' antics, like for real. They always have been, but at this point they really just have to deal with that. And it brings them in to be like even more humanized, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think up until this part, the trolls are some kind of authority, and they are antagonistic. And in this part, that's just dissolved wholesale, which I really like. They become like as much cream puffs as the rest of the humans, and they just slowly become to be involved in their bullshit, especially Carcat. That's all I gotta say. What do you have, Daft?
Okay, so this is the part of Homestuck where the classism with the hemospectrum really cannot be ignored. What else? I think and this act is also responsible for John and Vriska.
Oh god, that was a huge
The
fucking ship,
relationship.
Johnska.
Yes.
Oh my god.
I think that
That's
I think that's a very interesting relationship for a lot of reasons. First of all, John and Vriska are both privileged. That is a big conceit of their relationship. If John was not a privileged character, I don't think he would like Vriska.
No, yes, that's good.
My suspicions about this are confirmed later on when John basically goes like, "Yeah, you're dangerous, and
yes,
I don't
his
want
mind
to trust you
his
with
mind
the
changes.
weapon."
At first, he's like, "Oh, Vriska, it's okay that you
Yeah.
killed someone. You know, I'm sure you had good reasons. Like, it sounds really rough over there." Then later on, he meets, and this is critical, he meets the same Vriska and is like, I don't think you're...
Yeah, once
kinda,
he actually
you're kinda
gets to
sus.
know her as a person, yeah, everything just
Yeah.
falls apart immediately.
But then the frustrating thing is, his mind
So-
changes back, and he's like, oh yeah, Terezi said we have to save the old Vriska, so I'm just gonna do that. Okay, see ya. Which is very frustrating.
June, you're allowed to have thoughts in your head.
Yeah.
That would be really good, actually, if you did. It would be really good for you, I promise. Might hurt for a second, but you'll get over it.
You'll get a headache, but that's fine.
Like, the John and Vriska relationship is clouded with, like, cultural miscommunication and primary misunderstandings of each other as people that the fandom romanticized to hell and back, which says a lot about the demographic that indulged in Homestuck at the time.
Well, yeah,
And that people
I didn't
were
even
going
think of that.
fucking nuts when Vriska... Yeah, people were going fucking nuts when Vriska sent John the heart before she went off to go kill Doc Scratch. But going back to, like, the classism stuff, like, it's on full fucking display here. Vriska abusing her privilege as a cerulean led to bully Tavros, fucking paralyzes him. Vriska and Aradia are both mad about it. Aradia sends Vriska ghosts. Vriska sends Solix over to kill Aradia. And then what fucking happens? There's a lot. And then Vriska blinds Terezi, and then Aradia kills Vriska.
Fucking, can we just
and
talk
then Vriska God tears.
about
That's how it ends.
Terezi gets blinded by Vriska, and Terezi is like, in response, is
Yeah.
like, actually, I wanted to be blind. Diversity win. The bisexual girl who lives in a tree likes being blind.
Huge win for me.
Yeah, that is actually something I really wanted to talk about. Terezi being blind, that whole thing was so hideously mishandled from start to finish. Holy fucking shit. Oh my god,
God,
not
no.
only is she
Fuck.
a super cop, but she's also disability superpower girl.
my God.
It's so hideously disrespectful, yeah.
And then the disparity between how she's handled versus how Tavros is handled, where it's
Yeah.
like, well, if you have if you're a girl boss about it, then it's fine. But
Needing
like,
things
if there's
is
any
cringe.
sort of repercussions on you and you wouldn't need anything from anyone ever, then that's cringe.
I do agree with, I think, everyone else that this is kind of like, this is all very important stuff. It's very like foundational. It plays a lot into a lot of stuff that becomes important later on. It says a lot about the relationship between the characters, especially the trolls, and like it's interesting stuff, and it's, I think, meaningful and needs to be in there. But the stuff about your comments about Terezi actually got me thinking that like it would be nice to like to kind of even out things between the portrayal of disability between Terezi and Tavros, where like the way that I would do it personally is to show like, because I don't think that the comic has to like hyper focus on like this disability makes their life a living hell, because I don't think that's a good alternative to disability superpowers. But like to show like Terezi having to come to terms with, you know, the fact that she can't see anymore and like figure out how to deal with that. And then, you know, parallel Tavros having to come to terms with the fact that he is now paralyzed, or his legs are paralyzed.
The canon reason that Terezi was never bothered by it was that her Lucis was an unborn egg, and she was used to the not seeing.
Yeah, no,
and so that apparently translates to getting blinded. Big diversity win.
I'm not interested in I'm not interested in replicating that in the rewrite.
If Terezi would, you know, if June would let herself think a thought in her head once, that would be great. If Terezi would like allow herself to feel like a genuine feeling of pain ever, without like obfuscation or barriers or rationalizing, then she would be a lot better off too.
I agree.
With the main thing with Tavros, you just have to stop like making it be funny that he's going through this. Just don't, or at the very least, like subvert that and point out that if you laughed along at that joke, that was really fucked up.
Yeah, I think that like I think that you're dead on with that. Like, I think that this is an opportunity to give Terezi the seeds of like this kind of like getting rid of that whole like this devotion to the way Alternia is, because like Terezi is the biggest fucking, you know, like we said in the one of the previous episodes, she is Boots, like that. She is the fucking system, and it's like I think this is an opportunity to start to subvert that and undermine it, and to treat Tavros with more humanity than canon does. Like, both characters deserve to be treated with more complexity and nuance. Terezi deserves to be able to be vulnerable, which I think is a good setup for her future vulnerability, especially considering that part of the whole thing with the retcon and with Murderstuck and all that is her like guilt over killing Vriska and all that, and like that's not handled great in canon.
Yeah, that's what forces her to really accept that she has feelings, and that things actually have consequences, and you can't just keep brushing it off.
Yeah.
And, like, the fact that this is also easy to identify, I think points out, like, there's really so much that's actually very strong in Homestuck. It's just that, like, some things are so severe is what makes you really sad. You know, because it's actually a lot of good in there.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to framing. It's like, if you start to humanize Terezi and Tavros early on, and you show more nuance of their like reactions to these situations, and then when you start to get into, you know, the amplified versions of these same situations, then you've already established that they are on a path towards being more reflective. You can then use that character growth to springboard to them having an actual reaction emotionally to what's happening, and then you can treat characters with more nuance and more, again, the word compassion, when you get into some really fucked up shit, so that you don't have some of the issues with how Terezi is framed, with regards to Gamzee in particular, where it's not good. It's not good.
We've talked a lot about the trolls. Let's talk about some of the humans. And Momo wanted to say something about Rose.
I don't have to go first, but so I don't forget.
Yeah, go ahead.
So okay, cool. The sequence with Rose and the crystal ball and everything, the Grimdark, that happened before, right?
That is
before we get here.
No, you're correct. Grimdark happens after John goes God tier, and because there's the fake out death that happens with John. That's the first death in Homestuck, is Bec Noir kills God tier John, and also Rose's non-dream body.
Right, because the sequence, I want to keep this in mind from when we do get into Murderstuck. It looks at the crystal ball, snaps, and then this Lovecraftian imagery reaches down for her out of the sky, and it becomes grimdark, and her skin darkens. And then there's we go on, we see her go on this quest. The body that goes grimdark dies. It's dead.
Yeah.
And it's Rose's dream self that wakes up on Durst to go on this mission, and then even that's her most convinced that there is something that can be done about their circumstances, that they can defeat Doc Scratch. She still believes that at that point. She's seen outside of Homestuck, I think. It's that's kind of what happens with Grimdark, with that imagery. There is an outside of it. There is a space that is bigger than Homestuck. But I think what happens to her, unfortunately, after Cascade, and this is dipping just a toe into Act 6, it's really tragic. I think what she realizes why she's so depressed is she becomes aware, narratively, of her position and of her experiences, and realizes she, as she is too big for Homestuck. And then, later on in Act 6, when she says that to Dave, what could this possibly mean for my arc? Dave was like, it's fine, we don't have arcs. No, she's in very realistic pain because she understands what's going on. Jim. And it's heartbreaking to watch her
Rose
in that situation.
Dave have even a shred of empathy challenge.
She's right. Dave's wrong. Dave is wrong. It's the funniest. Sorry, I'm going too far forward. But it's just because all that really ties together. And this is all such it's so clear about what it is. I don't know if it knows what it is, but it's very forward.
Do you guys ever notice that Eldritch stuff in Homestuck is good? The horror terrors are never implied to be evil. They're just kind of what exists beyond. They're nice. They make dream bubbles. They helped. I mean, the Grimdark thing with Rose is framed as her getting manipulated by Doc Scratch by utilizing power that these Eldritch monstrosities are freely giving to her. Eldritch abominations in Homestuck are bros.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. I got nothing to say beyond that. What do you have to say, Daft?
I know this is far into the future, but that Act 6 conversation with Dave and Rose got me thinking. Dave, when he insists that that nobody has narratives, I can't help but see that as a narrative extension of him being all Lord English isn't that bad, which also is the impetus for the whole Dirk and Hal conversation. I do not want to not exist.
Exactly.
It all comes back together.
We're back to Obama hope. You can't go outside the box. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to subvert in the rewrite is we are not interested in creating a world where the best you can hope for is to have a slightly better existence within the same box. The ultimate goal is to destroy the box, not to just get more comfortable within it.
Mm-hmm. I do like that. Does anyone else have anything final to say about the humans before we move into Murderstuck, which I predict will be the largest part of this video?
Jade is so cool. And
God,
what this
fuck
does
yes.
is
I
it
forgot about
sets up...
Jade just like Hussey did. I'm sorry.
Jade is so cool, and what Jade is like, she was told by the White Queen that this was all for a reason, and that she was part of a plan, and she had like incredible work to do, and that there was, by her words, something worth fighting for. That is the line in Homestuck that like should have defined everything. That's so good, and like she was so utterly betrayed, and the idea, like the very idea of there being something worth fighting for, was used to just totally exploit her for the rest of her life. And I just had to point that out because it sucks. She's so
actually,
cool.
Shit, that actually makes me think of something. And I freely admit this is extremely biased because Jade is one of my favorite characters. But I think that because Jade's role in Homestuck, as it exists in canon, is very like procedural, I guess maybe is the best way to put it. Like she does certain important things with a narrative, and then she gets like shuffled off, and then she gets brought back when she has something else to do.
And then she comes back to die.
And then she comes back to die, yay. And I think that having Jade, like, in the rewrite, to have her, instead of serving as this kind of, like, narrative tool that gets used when you need a certain thing to happen, to have Jade be the core of that hope for something that is outside of this box. Like, she is probably she's probably the most realistically optimistic character. Like, I know that June is like a very like, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. I write June as a very optimistic character. June in canon isn't. June in canon is this like just kind of like very blank slate, just kind of like do the things that you're told to do and like whatever, it's fine. But Jade is a character that, and I think we get hints of this, where she has this genuine like hope and care for things, and I think that to have the rewrite emphasize that more and like bring it into the story more, where she becomes the driving force for the idea that like, no, things actually do not have to be just shit forever, because and some other stuff that happens later I think will play into this, like her being turned into the Grimbark version of herself, which is kind of like the inverse of that whole like hopeful person, where she's this very cynical, bitter, negative force. And like,
because she got betrayed,
right? Exactly. And to show her having to go through that as a downswell in her arc, and then have her be able to recover from it, and then regain that sense of hope for a better world, and then use that to inspire the others to fix things and make things better. Like, I think that her role in this story, there's like a missing piece in Homestuck, and I think that Jade fits very nicely into it, because like, of all the characters, like, that's like, she's the one that feels the most like, of all the main characters, like there's something that she was supposed to be doing that just like doesn't happen. And I think that like Homestuck gets so cynical about itself that it's like, well, we can't have the hopeful character. Like, I know she's not a hope player, but she is hopeful as a person. Like,
they'd be like, that's lazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Just imagine like Jade and Rose having this sort of not necessarily a romantic, doesn't have to be, but it could be a little bit.
It could be
this Utena and Anthe situation where Rose has been like so broken down and realized that the story doesn't value the totality of her experience, and Jade is like, the story might not, but I fucking do. Let's go.
That would be and that's the thing that like, I think that's one thing that Homestuck, in spite of all of its like massive amount of characters talking past each other, one of the things it needs a lot more of, and I'm not saying it has none of this, but it needs more moments where the characters connect to each other on an emotional level. Like, the story needs an exchange where Rose and Jade are talking, and Jade subverts that sense of like cynicism and hopelessness, and like, I love that, the idea of like, maybe the narrative doesn't care about you, but I do. Like, it doesn't matter, because like, we exist as independent thinking, feeling entities, and that plays into the whole idea of that the narrative is this thing that you don't necessarily have to, you know, obey thoughtlessly until the end of time, because you're writing a story.
And to be so perfect because Jade is the science girl. Like, she
Yes.
knows the math. She
Exactly.
can do the math. She understands that math is a problem. Yes, she gets it.
Yeah.
But also, fuck it. Too cool.
She's the science girl who evaluates things, but she's also one of the most, like, emotionally, like, open characters in the story. Like, we see that from the very beginning of her introduction.
I love the idea of Rose talking to Jade, and Jade just being like, "You're kind of being a downer. Please stop."
Yeah.
And because
No.
Rose never gets that, and she
Right.
is, and Homestuck's message is like, yeah, being being a horrible person and like mistreating your friends because you're sad is fine, and that's what it's telling you through Rose, especially her blossoming love for Kanaya in this thing. Kanaya is basically telling her to be like, you should stop and like think about what you're doing, and Rose is like, no, and she does get killed for it, but she doesn't, because death is not real in Homestuck. And I'm sure we'll get more into Rose specifically and the potential shipping sort of situation
Actually,
between
I do have
the very many polycules that we could slot
I
Rose
do.
into.
Rosemary.
I do have a
Con-
thing to
continue,
say
Daft,
about
please.
Naya and Rose interactions in Act 5. So, I mean, I've gone on a little bit of a thing
Yeah.
before about how it's just not a healthy relationship. And this is like the first inklings of it happening, but I don't know where people priorities were at the time, but they really should have looked at that relationship and went, this isn't going as well as it should have. But Kanaya is basically just repeating her Moire allegiance with Vriska, which was romantic in nature, and Rose is just ignoring it. I really do think people should have stopped and said, hey, Andrew Hussey, could you maybe, not repeat the Vriska and Kanaya situation? And maybe he
God,
wouldn't
yes,
have had
that's
the gall to
huge.
do that, because if you remember, a lot of Homestuck was reader-based motivated, and people were legitimately excited for lesbian representation in the year of our Lord 2011.
Yeah, diversity win. The girls are fighting.
Ow.
Oh my god.
It was. Daft, you brought this up earlier in the text chat that we have, that it's kind of baffling how many people liked Rosemary at the time. And there are some of this stuff gets ironed out, in my opinion, in Act 6, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But they
I
were
don't
so
think it's
excited about it.
baffling. I think it's just more depressing that people were more just engaging
Yes.
with it for what they wanted to see.
They were just looking for rep.
regardless of what was actually happening.
Yeah. They just wanted to say to be able to say lesbians
Yeah.
are in this comic.
Right.
Which is a bad reason to have representation. But at the same time, it was one of the... I've said this before, I think, but Homestuck was the second piece of media that had a gay couple in it, the first being Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Right, there was
which
no
was like
other
barrier
art
gays.
ever made,
Right.
ever,
That's it.
with any gay people, as we know. There is only Joss Whedon and Andrew Hussey, the only artists
Right.
that have ever done any gay
That
characters.
used to be true, though. And
No,
not
JoJo, it's not.
right.
the
It's
thing.
not true. It was true for me and true for a lot of other people of my demographic
Yeah.
at that time. And that, again, that's not how it was, but it was the reality for the readership, I think.
Right, it's these artists who, in the positions that they're in, can afford to take these risks, as they have already, developed followings by making very conventional things. And that's sort of the problem. Like, I still want really good things for Rosemary. I still love them. I still, see the potential for the chemistry in those characters. It's undeniable. But, being honest about what we have, it's...
But before the Rosemary
There's-
crowd lynches us, we do like the ship.
I'm a lesbian. Of course I love Rosemary. But
Yeah,
being
exactly.
honest, what happens in the epilogues in Homestuck 2 is Homestuck being honest about what it thinks Rosemary is.
Yeah.
That's not changing anything from how it was
Ooh.
before. It's not divesting from
right.
canon. That's honestly what Homestuck thinks
Yeah,
of Rosemary.
I share Momo's sentiments. Also, as a lesbian, I really liked I really liked Rosemary existing, but like I'm not gonna lie and say it was like good. It wasn't.
No.
They had lots of problems. I wanted it
had
to
potential.
be good.
Yes, that is the huge thing, is people wanted it to be good, so they ignored the weird shit.
That was actually a big feeling I got from the epilogues in Homestuck too. Like, it was literally Homestuck looking at itself and saying, and just looking at Rosemary straight in the eyes and says, maybe this shouldn't have happened in the way it happened. But that's okay, because I'll get those little Rosemary fans for just being optimistic.
Yeah, that's rough. I mean, there was the whole divorce fever phenomenon afterwards, which was...
The people are just trying to rationalize this absurd fucking experience they were thrown into. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but that is
No, I
some
get
grade
that.
A coping we were looking at right there.
Yes.
I can say it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I like it's, and the way that the Willowa relationships are treated throughout the comic is really weird, and then like post canon just made it exponentially weirder. And like it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and it's like, can we like not do this, please? Actually, like, yeah. As someone who ships Jade Rosemary and read Homestuck 2, yeah, that's all I need to say on that.
So I think the next order of business is probably the moment that at least the listeners have been waiting for. Murderstuck. And before we get into it, I'll do another brief recap, because there's a clusterfuck that goes on in Murderstuck, to the point where some people consider different parts of, like, some people consider Terezi killing Vriska not to be part of Murderstuck, etc. So I'm just going to go
People
over...
also just forget what happens. Like,
Yes. There's so fucking much. So I'll give them a brief recap. The inciting incident, you could call it, is Dave causes Gamzee to go nuts by showing him ICP IRL. Gamzee is also implied to have run out of Soper Slime, which has been said to pacify him. I'm not going to comment on what I think of that yet. We'll talk about that soon. Vriska kills Tavros, because Tavros wants revenge for Vriska starting the whole fucking cycle of creating Bec Noir. Terezi starts her investigation and pins all the crimes on Vriska. Aridin blasts the Matriorb, KOs Solix, and kills Pfeffery, and also Kanaya, sort of. Kanaya becomes a vampire with a big hole in her stomach. Gamzee kills Nepeta and Equius. I think that was just house cleaning on Andrew Hussey's part. He just wanted to get rid of some extra guys. Kanaya saws Aridin in half, which is probably the best moment in Homestuck for me. Gamzee frames Vriska for all those crimes and gets Terezi to think that Vriska did it. Vriska does not deny this, because she thinks killing people is cool. And then finally, after a couple things quiet down, Vriska goes to kill Bec Noir, who gets killed by Terezi, and it's a just death because, it of course it is. And then there's the final roof showdown between everybody, where the problem is resolved, the problem being Gamzee, and the resolution being Karkat's More Allegiance, which goes absolutely fucking nowhere. We'll go right to left again, just our broad thoughts on Murderstuck. And I would say Murderstuck is the focus of this episode, because, like, it's probably the biggest event in Homestuck so far, because up until now only one character has died, and it's kind of like a kid's comic, but this is the point where Homestuck becomes real here, I think.
How many times do you discover the dead corpses of your father and your your friends?
How many kids' comics say taint as many times as Homestuck does before Act 5, JoJo?
Homestuck, a family picture.
Yeah, it's not a kid's comic. It's just
Right.
later into it.
Not. I really did say kids comic. Huh?
Say that.
It's lighter in tone.
Kids' age is
I
for
think I would
embryos.
capitulate too.
Kids aged 19 to 37.
It's it's rated M now. No one under 18 has or can read
You
it.
know what they say? Homestuck is for eggs.
Oh.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
Oh, perfect.
For the less aware members of the audience, that was a trans joke.
God, we're good at podcasting.
So this is you mentioned this is one of the first like big events. I think what that means is like this is where we really start getting into like the themes of what Homestuck is doing, and like we're a lot of the analysis of what these characters are like and what classes and aspects are like and what you can sort of take out of Homestuck really ramped up here as well, because there's a lot to dig into. And that...
Yeah, it's a house of cards.
Whatever we do to this, whether we do change anything or not, we're going to have to be careful because everything's thematically relevant, which has been like sort of the theme of this episode, but it's particularly important here.
Murderstuck. So
Yeah.
remember what I said an indeterminable amount of time ago about like the beats of Rose looking into the crystal ball and then being reached by these other powers and the imagery there, then going on this rampage. That's exactly what happens to Gamzee, beat for beat. It's the same thing. Which tells me these characters are in the same situation.
He goes Grimhonk.
Yeah, it's Grimhonk.
Okay, that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write that down.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Continue.
So yeah, that's that, and that tells me like this is really important for what this character is realized about their story.
To add on to what Momo is saying, if you're paying attention to one panel from when Jack Nor and PM are fighting each other, you will notice that horror terrors have
Purple.
Yeah, is that? I thought that meant they had fuchsia blood like Fefri's Lucis. Was it purple?
No, it's purple.
It's purple.
Yeah.
it's purple.
So Rose and
scratch his
Gamzee,
chin.
and the Lovecraftian imagery and purple, they're all kind of unified into, what's going on
Interesting.
here, and the association of purple also with voodoo, by Homestuck and by the other media properties it has adopted from to represent voodoo in the comic. Ty,
You mean ICP?
No, Dr. Vasilier from Princess and the Frog.
Oh, right.
Perlos' whole design.
Yep.
Tie purple to blackness, yeah.
And then there's Baron Samadai.
Which is the religious figure in voodoo that's associated with the color purple. So it's all this kind of it ties that all together. So Homestuck's got some unconscious proclivities.
That and unintentionality is a good way to put the sort of thesis of this rewrite. Who are we on?
Big yeah. The biggest yeah.
Anything to add to that, Daft?
Okay, I'm actually gonna go through this list-wise. Dave causes Gamzee to go nuts. So Dave and Gamzee actually have a lot in common. Absolutely everything is based on the fact that Dave recognizes that Gamzee is responsible for the existence of the kids. And Dave recognizes this and he feels immense guilt over it, but the way he chooses to excise this guilt is by saying, nothing matters. I'm gonna keep it the way it is, Chief.
He doesn't know
You're not
how to do
changing my
anything.
mind.
Knights are useless.
How to express himself.
Yeah, he's kind of... Actually, he does everything based on this innate, desire to keep alive, but for the wrong reasons, whereas Gamzee stays alive because he legitimately cares about people. It's like this dichotomy of shit. Okay. Vriska kills Tavros. Very, straightforward. Except, this actually goes back into ancestor bullshit, which we're not going to get into this episode. We're going to put a pin in that for right now. Terezi investigates. Terezi investigating was, hugely contentious at the time because people were all like, is she being mind-controlled, or is Gamzee using the chuckle voodoos? What is my hot take on Terezi investigating? She's a stupid 13-year-old who's not really, who's not really good at what she does. I'm gonna leave it at that. Eridan blasts the orb. He's a genocidal maniac. Eridan KOs Solux. out of romantic jealousy because Solux was Veveri's matesprit. Eridan kills Veveri. He is a genocidal maniac. Kanaya becomes vampire. Once again, Eridan is a genocidal maniac. Gamzee kills Nepeta and Equius. Gamzee kills Nepeta out of mercy because he realizes that the narrative that Nepeta is in does not care for Nepeta and would only turn Nepeta into an XP of Gamzee, so Gamzee mercy kills Nepeta so that she doesn't have to live through the stupid bullshit that is Equius and Homestuck. And then Gamzee kills Equius because Equius sexually abused them. Kanaya saws Eridan in half. Democrats versus Republicans. Gamzee frames Vriska. I don't really have much to comment on this one. I'm just gonna say that both characters have a lot in common, and I do think Gamzee pays a lot more attention to Vriska than people give them credit for. Vriska goes to kill Bec Noir. Vriska, in the most stupid act of self-righteous heroism ever, declares herself to be the person who will kill Bec Noir.
She declares herself the protagonist of Homestuck.
Established. Yes, because also she created Bec Noir. This is actually very, very prophetic for very many reasons. Homestuck itself is a self-perpetuating Ouroboros. Now, we can't talk about the Ouroboros thing until Act 6, but just keep it in mind, because that's coming back later. The Ouroboros-ness of Homestuck. Vriska kills Terezi. Now Terezi doesn't want to kill Vriska. She and Vriska have a lot in common. They kill kids together. They flarp together.
God damn it.
Yeah.
That'll be the title of this video.
They ignore their socioeconomic place in the system and commit atrocities together. Terezi really does not want to kill Vriska, but Terezi rationalizes this as the plot will not let the two most important characters die. She's referring to herself and Karkat. That's actually not true. They're not really very important in the grand scheme of the narrative. They are there to contextualize the narrative, but they are not the two most important characters in the narrative, so it's a moment of self-aggrandization there. And then she kills Vriska. And then there's the Moire allegiance between Karkat and Gamzee. It's a fucking lie. Hussey was lying to us. He came out with his gun. He was dragging Karkat and Gamzee into the mountains. They were both holding hands. He shot them out there. And it was all planned from that fucking moment.
Yes. I think reflective of the Rosemary thing, Gamcat, I don't know the ship name. Gamcar, sure. Gamcar had potential. It was just, it was immediately dropped.
More than potential.
Right
it was
away.
Like, this was important. And that scared Homestuck so much.
It is the most important relationship in Homestuck. There is no relationship that contextualizes Homestuck so violently and so angrily and so rawly as Gamcar. You cannot understate the importance of Gamcar to the narrative.
It's huge. And it's just dropped right away.
I think that, because Murder Stuck has a lot going on, and some of it sets up some not great stuff in the future, especially with regards to Gamzee and, their motivations for doing this, and, how their sort of, framework of reality is portrayed versus, the narrative and Doc Scratch and all of that. And I think that this provides an opportunity in the rewrite to show Gamzee at sort of their lowest point, and I agree with Momo that there's a lot of parallels with what's happening with Rose, and to extend the same courtesy to Gamzee of being able to recover from that low point. Where, first of all, I would lose the drugs keep them from killing people thing, just fucking flat out, because I think that's reprehensible, and I think it plays
one of the hugest parts
really
of Gamzee that is just bald face, and horrible.
It's not good, and emphasizing the manipulation of Doc Scratch, where Gamzee has this very strong cultural identity based on his or their whatever the pronouns in canon are him, her. I don't know, or him, whatever. You know what I mean. I don't know if we're doing a non-binary Gamzee, but I'll say they. That they have this very strong cultural identity, based on their religion and all of this stuff, and like how that ties into like the true nature of reality and all that. And what Doc Scratch is doing is essentially like manipulating them so that Doc Scratch can say, look, this was all lies. And then, you know, that they sort of like, they have this strong identity, and then that gets ripped away. Like all of their hope for things gets taken away. They're in this incredibly like manipulated, abused position. Dave is playing right into this. I mean, Dave is basically like, yeah, look at the lie you believe. Like, you've got a lot of like this idea of this thoughtlessness and this carelessness with people's feelings, where what motivates Gamzee to do this is fully buying into the idea that everything that they believed, everything that they held dear to them, everything that was important to them was a bunch of lies, and that the alternative, the devil's bargain, is worth accepting. And then this starts this whole chain of like manipulation where you have like, and I think some of it, like the Terezi being potentially mind controlled, like all of that stuff is like, no, she is well, in our rewrite, young adult who doesn't know what the fuck she's doing. You know, she makes a lot of assumptions about people based in her position within the society, and like, you know, plays from there. Also, Momo has something to say. I'll pause what I'm saying and then come back to it.
Well, a lot of people think that it is seeing the Insane Clown Posse video that sets Gamzee off to, you know, be to be a threat. That's not actually true. Gamzee only leaves the room. It's not until after two things happen. He finds Tavros' body, and he talks to Doc Scratch. And what were you saying? Like, with Rose and Gamzee, they are both finding their identity is incomprehensible inside of Homestuck. That's why Dave doesn't, you know, care about either of them. He just can't think about that. He is in the same boat. He just doesn't want to think about it. The sequence of what happens to Gamzee is also, again, Wizard D. Herbert has the same scene. It's like, there's this character, we learn Gamzee was in love with Tavros. There's this gay character, who then is manipulated by an older adult, by that access, in this way that, like, the universe is saying that your attraction to this person is doomed and will never be validated, because, you know, he's literally dead. So therefore, you can only be a villain in this story. And that's what plays out.
Exactly. And I think that's something that gets so, like, it's something that Homestuck, like, it's in there if you're willing to dig for it, but it gets so lost in some very, like, weird racist tropes, and, like, just, like, oh, Gamzee's a horrible character, he's irredeemable, which is something
they joke later on in Homestuck too about how he gets a redemption arc and how laughable that is. Which sucks.
It's a joke, but like about someone that doesn't exist. Like, Homestuck is just not actually talking to the people who are invested in this character. They're afraid of the conversation.
To actually show that this is a character who is being explicitly manipulated in a way that is very, like, abusive, very controlling, that plays out in a very, like, violent way. I think that there are some bits in there where you can show, like, even in the midst of this, like, the idea of killing Nepeta out of a sense of, like, compassion for sparing her. Like, I think if you make some of that clearer too, that helps to, like, show that this character, even in the depths of their worst point, they are not completely irredeemable. And then you have all of this stuff play out, all this stuff with Vriska and Terezi, and then, like, what you're left with at the end of this is you have a setup for where you can then show Gamzee throughout the rest of the comic in a more nuanced light, rather than being kind of a joke character. Homestuck makes out Gamzee to be this, like, monster character, like a joke character, then a monster character, then a joke character. And it's like, I think that to show Gamzee as, you know, a nuanced character, and then someone who is manipulated into doing something reprehensible, and then someone who is traumatized by that, but who has the ability, like, the narrative gives them the opportunity to heal from that and come to terms with what happened, and for the other characters to do that as well, rather than just making them into this ridiculous joke
Yeah.
that then gets, in post-canon gets...
The more allegiance, the Shushpep, that could have been like the start of a sort of Utena Anthe arc for Karkat and Gamzee, which would have like made Karkat realize his position to, usurp narrative and, recognize Gamzee's position as a victim of narrative. The reason the imagery of Murderstuck is like so aggressive and so violent, there's like blood and decapitation and all these gruesome things, is because of the deep-seated homophobia that's nestled deep down into Homestuck's like perspective. That it never quite gets over because we see what happens with other gay characters later.
Yeah, and I think to have the narrative not take that tack is going to be very important, because, like, again, it's not always just the literal events, it's the way that they are framed and then reflected on later on. And, like, I think a lot of the stuff that we have happen in this specific part of the story, it's more important how it's reflected back on later on.
If you want me to sell
like
you on a non-binary or even a transfeminine Gamzee, if we look at like what Tavros is sort of established to be a heterosexual character. Gamzee likes Karkat and Tavros, these boys who like only show interest in girls, and that's just like another thing of what's. And in Murderstuck, what the way Gamzee gets Karkat to the roof is to give him this note impersonating Terezi, inviting him for sloppy makeouts. Like, Gamzee borrows Terezi's glasses. There's gender. I'll say it. There's gender.
We touched on that in a previous episode, but we're really substantiating that right now with the Gamzee's homophobia. What were you saying, Daft?
We were talking about this in chat earlier, but it's in regards to the Bards class, how both characters who are Bards, Gamzee and to a lesser extent Cronus, have had all of their problems as characters like exemplified through the rigid masculine expectations that society has for them, and both characters are consumed by it. Gamzee is able to thrive in it only because they want to thrive, and Cronus falls out of those expectations so fucking hard.
Yeah, I agree.
It's obvious that Homestuck is saying something about the rigid gender expectations that are placed upon people who would be conceived as men, but it can't bring itself to self-actualize because it never wants to.
Cronus's only character trait is that he is performatively heterosexual, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot.
He burns out so hard. He
Yes.
is a complete systemic burnout.
Well, I wouldn't say that he's heterosexual, like, in text. He's definitely not, but like that sort of like performative sexuality is basically his only character trait.
Yes. We've talked a lot about Gamzee for good reason, because this is his time, his moment to shine before in the text he basically becomes a puppet, and we'll talk more about that when it gets there. But there are two locuses of which Murderstuck hinges. Gamzee is the main one, the sort of shadow man who makes everything happen. And then the other one is Vriska, who is pinned, the blame is pinned on her. I'm not going to say Aridin is a locus, because he just kind of... Gamzee and Vriska have a reason to do something.
He's a bomb that goes off.
Yeah, he's a bomb that goes off. He would have fucking done this of any provocation. He's been waiting for this.
This is a Tuesday.
Yes, he is.
To Aridin.
He's killed parents before and shown no remorse, unlike Vriska, who has killed people and shown a little bit of remorse. But let's talk about Vriska.
She starts to become mildly class conscious.
I would say yes, and she gets punished for it.
Vriska is really trying to justify her own existence because she can't accept that she can exist unconditionally, like exist as a person who is loved unconditionally, exist as someone's friend unconditionally. She just can't accept that that is a kind of existence that she could have. And the thing is, in Homestuck, she's right. That's what's fucked up, because in Homestuck, in narrative, in the mythology that Skaya and Lord English is crafting,
yes,
she's right, and that sucks for her.
Even in the retcon, she is brought back to life conditionally, because the story needs her. Anyway, continue. Fuck.
Right. it's not allowed to just be Terezi needs her back because she loves her. It's we need you back because you are going to girl boss the best, and you have to be the atlas upon which this whole world is carried, except for she's not, because Gamzee also. These two characters are in the same situation, which is like why I think they
I think that like that's the thing is like again there's a lot of these characters where they are trapped within these roles that they're assigned by a manipulative narrative, and like again I think that it's very important that you establish that one, this is a thing that's happening, two, it's not a good thing, and three, there is a way out of it. It's just that they have to like recognize it and work toward it, and like Vriska's not at that point right now. Like I think that we will have some stuff to say on that when we come into like the other version of Vriska that does have a little bit more like self-awareness, and like how we handle Vriska with the retcon, which I take some issue with how Homestuck handled her as a character, and like to get to the point where the characters realize that they're not trapped by this framework, and that there is another way, rather than again not living within the framework as comfortably as possible, but taking the revolutionary stance that the framework can be dismantled. And Vriska is a big part of that, because like she's so wrapped up in narrative expectations and wanting to be a part of that, and like it's something that is incredibly harmful to her, just like Gamzee, just like Rose, just like Jade, just like every single fucking character in this. And like to show these characters like growing awareness of that as we go on, and then like growing dissatisfaction with that and willingness to fight against it, rather than like accepting it, because accepting it leads to some form of self-destruction. And then we see that with Vriska in post-canon, where even when she comes back, she's this like she's like a shadow self, where she's just like all of the stereotypes of the worst version of Vriska writ large, and nothing
Vriska
else.
Flanders.
Vriska,
right.
That sucks. Yeah.
I also want to point out something that I don't think gets discussed in Vrisk analysis a lot, which is she caused Bec Noir to happen, which only Tavros really punishes her for, because Terezi doesn't care about that. She's just saying, like, you've done some bad things, and you're probably going to go do some more bad things, so I have to kill you now. Not, you made this whole situation. With
both Tavros and Terezi, they know if Vriska goes to fight Bec Noir, she's going to lead him back to them, so they're fighting for their lives, also. Like, it's a choice they have to make for survival.
I think with Tavros, he does it explicitly because he finds out that Vriska made. I don't think she has a plan when it's him.
No, she makes him knowing she's going to go fight him. She states like that's what she wants to do.
No, you're right.
That's actually something I think ties very well into the whole idea that there is an inevitability within the narrative that's this harmful, destructive inevitability that you need to eventually fight against. And like, Vriska doesn't create Bec Noir with the intention of having Bec Noir kill everyone. Vriska creates Bec Noir thinking that she's going to go fight Bec Noir, and she's going to be the big hero, and that she's going she's going to fulfill her role within the narrative. And like, she creates this situation that creates the prerequisites for all of this other stuff happening. Like again, you're in this timeline where Bec Noir's existence is an inevitability, and like I think that's something that's, again, it's very important to look at it in the context of like what is inevitable in the narrative as it's set up by the preliminary conditions and Doc Scratch and the narrative force, and then how are you going to address that when you get to the idea that the narrative is something that can be fought against, and something that can be subverted, and something that can be defeated eventually. And again, I don't think Homestuck does a super great job of that. I think it tries, at least sometimes, but like more often than not it falls flat on its face, and then the epilogues reached up from the grave and pulled us down into hell. So
they had to come and remind us that Homestuck has shit opinions
Yeah, it's like
Couldn't let
it's
us
the
rest.
fucking it's the twist at the end of the horror movie where the killer was alive the whole time and it sucks.
Yeah. Before we move on to other, I think the final murder stuck thing we can talk about is something that I wanted to bring up. So we'll get to that soon. But finally, before we move on, does anyone have anything to say?
I think it would be cool if we, like... This is also the bit where it'd be nice to sort out what Homestuck's doing with its sexuality to some extent. Like,
Yeah.
you could have characters say they're a specific sexuality in some way. To be blunt, I would like Vriska to... I don't think it's Vriska is bisexual, I think, is... Yeah. What waffling around that, though, is, like... I know that Homestuck's like, well, all the trolls are biologically bisexual or whatever. That's not how that works. I don't like that. Can we just...
That's also just not what he writes. He writes all these relationships, and none. You'll find like
oh my
none
God.
of them.
I have a horrible idea. What if it could be like Vriska talking to Rose or someone else, and they're explaining what a lesbian is, and Vriska is like, "Oh, I know someone like that. It's Kanaya. Now I have a new name to call her."
Oh my god, you slur dropped.
So, sorry, continue.
God, I mean, that's... I would like Vriska to be canonically bisexual in text. That would be cool. I think we kind of alluded to, but this is also a good place to, like, start making the genders with Gamzee more explicit, and you can perhaps elaborate on that later, perchance. Because we are purposely trying to be kinder to the characters. We've got a bunch of character backstories leading up to this point, well, no, we've skipped over that bit. We're in Murder Stuck. Yeah, but again, I think a bunch of the stuff that we're discussing is mostly a matter of how we are framing the events of the story, with some exceptions of small things we may change. And we're also still somewhat in the territory of, like, setting things up for later, particularly, like, if you're going to have the roof showdown that ends in a pale moment, then you can fucking stick to it, maybe, instead of collapsing under the weight of your own implications.
Yeah, don't be scared of what that scene meant. Like, it's there for a reason. Boys can kiss.
Non-binary clowns and boys.
They might not even stay boys.
I think that's really important, especially if you're going to show Gamzee as being something other than an irredeemably evil monster or a joke. Is like you're presenting the character with a depth of emotion that I think is important to humanize and make a character sympathetic. Like, if you show the character as nothing but monstrous and ridiculous, then, like, of course they're not a sympathetic character. They were not written to be. But it's almost like we're writing this, like, on purpose.
That's a good idea.
So, you know.
That's actually a great segue into what I wanted to propose. Now, this is a personal thing. Definitely a biased suggestion, but I think it would clear up a lot of the issues we've been talking about. And that is to, in Murder Stuck, not kill Nepeta. And let me explain what I mean. So there are two big reasons for this. One is that I like Nepeta. That's it. The second, so the moment specifically that I want to talk about is where Gamzee kills Equius. And I think it's important that he does kill Equius because Equius has been sort of weird to Gamzee up until now, and Equius also has a sense of justice to the point where he would be like, no, if someone's murdering people, I should probably step in because I'm really strong. But then...
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe Gamzee doesn't kill Nepeta, because why would he?
I also agree
really?
that Nepeta
Like,
should live.
I know that Nepeta gets pissed off and intervenes after that fight in that walk-around flash, but, like, why would he kill Nepeta?
Right.
I think that would humanize him troll a lot. You know what I mean? I think that would bring a lot of that humanization back to Gamzee, and it would say that, you know, he's not just a mindless killing machine who will later become a puppet. He's a person with feelings. He's a person with beef.
Yeah, we cut away, and we don't show. So yeah, it was speculated for a long time that Nepeta was hiding an event, and it would be so great
Yeah.
for her to just pop out later, like, haha, it's me, the dark horse of Homestuck.
They think she's dead, and it was like happened off screen, and she comes out of event, and she's like, "You fucking assholes! You left me in like a random room. I was locked in there for days."
Oh, that, you know what would be funnier than having Gamzee stuck in the vents on the meteor?
Oh my
It's
god!
It's not, it's
Like,
Nepeta.
that's weird. I
It's
heard
Nepeta.
meowing in the vents. Are you cloning cats again? No, that's weird.
The Rose is like, I couldn't take any of them with me. How could there be cloned cats? And then you hear,
And they're like, Nepeta, why didn't you tell us you were alive? She's like, I want to hang out with you assholes.
really like that idea. That's a
Fuck you
very good
guys.
idea. And I think there's kind of two ways you can go with it, and I think they highlight slightly different things, and I don't know which I know which one I would pick, but I don't know which one we should do for the rewrite. I like the idea that Nepeta is like hiding out in the vents. That's actually good. Where you're basically like you're cutting away. It's implied that Gamzee kills Nepeta, and then it's revealed later that they didn't actually kill Nepeta. Nepeta was alive. They spared Nepeta. So you've got that kind of like, dread and then tension release later. The other,
Or even better, Nepeta comes back and she's like, "Hey, Gamzee, how's it going?" And he's like, "Hey, what's up?"
and then the other
Sorry.
approach, and this is probably how I would personally write it, but I don't necessarily know if it works for the rewrite, would be to specifically show Gamzee sparing Nepeta in the moment, which then opens up the question of like, why did they do that? Oh, maybe I'm not seeing everything here. And like, I think both of them have like pacing wise, they obviously work differently, and they highlight and obscure different elements of Gamzee as a character. Where like, I think the full picture will ultimately be revealed either way, but like, it kind of depends on like the specifics of narrative pacing of like what kind of tone you're trying to set in the moment. But I do like the idea of Nepeta hiding in the vents, so
Nepeta vented. Sus.
Fuck up.
Olive is sus. Sorry, I had to. No one made the joke yet, so I had to make. I'm sorry, everybody.
there are two cultural references that have come into the lexicon post Homestuck that have nothing to do with Homestuck, but like nonetheless reference it.
oh God,
Thanos
you're right.
being inevitable and Among Us are the two things that are just like, they aren't Homestuck,
That's
but they
beautiful.
are also Homestuck. You know? I held my tongue about the Thanos thing earlier when we were talking about inevitability, but Thanos is a Lord English type character, except he sucks more somehow.
Thanos is a valid troll name.
Oh, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up.
I think we've covered Murder Suck in the capacity that we need to. If we have anything else, we can go into it next time. The final thing that we should talk about broadly for this is the exploits of Jack Noir. And once again, for the readers, I'll have a brief recap.
I loved him in School of Rock.
Da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
That's not a connection I made. That was
Very
an actually
charming.
funny joke, unlike mine.
Thank you. That's the first one I made.
Good job. Momo gets the star for this
Yeah,
episode.
that's a thing that we're
Yay.
doing now.
Pinning it.
Momo gets the Applebee's gift card.
Yeah, ew. No, wait. The Friendly's gift card.
The Friendly's gift card.
I don't think they have those
Nice.
up here.
really
That's a
good
thing
in
that
one
exists outside of
specific.
New England.
Yeah. It's like half of the friendlies
okay,
in New
I'll-
England are
I'll
closed
walk.
and turned into other things now anyways, because
They
nobody knows what the fuck
are.
a friendlies is.
They're Spirit Halloweens.
I think the most that people would know it as is like a very limited ice cream brand.
It's mediocre ice
If I
cream.
get out my front door right now and start walking, I'll probably make it there before Homestuck 2 is ending posted. So
Well, we're gonna leave that in, I guess.
you don't have to. But you don't have to not to.
That's fair.
What were we
okay,
talking
yeah.
about? Jack Noir?
Yeah, Jack Noir.
Jack Noir, fuck!
And when I say Jack Noir, I mean, of course, the one who becomes Beck Noir, not the Trolls one. The Trolls one has a whole different... We didn't talk about him, but he has more to do with the Doc Scratch stuff, so we're not going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the Earth Kid's Jack Noir, who, in this act, kills Bro and fucks up Lois. gets prototyped with Beck, becomes OP, invades the troll session. That's after, obviously, that sequentially that's after his exploits, but it's shown in this part. He kills Dad and Mom, and then Rose during the Grimdark thing. He has a problem where he still loves Jade, which is a detail that I frankly love. It's sort of his kryptonite, appropriately. He kills the universe from the outside, and finally destroys the trolls Prospect and Durst, causing problems for them. And he invades the Exiles quest as well, and fucks them up, leaving only the Wayward Vagabond as a survivor and Peregrine Mendicant with the ring to fight him. And...
well, remember, it is very important that the him invading the Exiles quest actually comes before him crossing.
yes,
over
before
into the
he...
trolls.
sequentially, but not in the narrative.
Yeah, because that's
So,
how
like,
PM
yeah.
gets behind him to follow him across the universe.
Correct.
Right?
And yes, you're right. The only problem I have with this is how I don't have a problem with Bec Noir in this part. I have a problem that he becomes irrelevant later. So
I mean, sometimes that happens. Like, he's the first arc villain.
I want him to have something to do when he gets there. He's a cool, angry dog.
So
murder
yes,
dog.
I should specify. I don't. What I mean is, him having like a delayed arrival time. That's fine. But then when he gets there, he's still meaningless. Does that make sense? Like once he gets to the new session, the alpha session.
He gets pretty instantly knocked out, but you know why? It's because, like, 3 other Jacks were introduced. It's cool that there's more than one, but, like, you did already have a one that was, like, pending fucking things up.
Too many Jacks.
Too many
Yeah.
cooks.
Too many Jacks.
Too many Jacks.
Jax. Takes a lot to
Kill a man.
Fuck.
man.
I like Jack Noir. I like Bec Noir a lot. I think that they're a really interesting villain. They're very, very menacing, which I really like. Very good villain. I wouldn't actually change much of anything with this. There's 2 things that I think I would probably tweak. One is, and this isn't necessarily this specific thing, but maybe get rid of one or 2 of the extra Jacks. Like maybe consolidate them in like later on, yeah. Like maybe consolidate the Jacks a little bit because I think that would keep the focus more on like we already have a number of villains. Like we don't necessarily need to have like friggin' like 20 of them. That's or minimize their role in the narrative or something like that. The other thing is I think I really love the detail that Bec Noir still cares about Jade in like this very instinctual way that becomes important later. And consciously he hates it, but like I think that I would make sure to emphasize that because I think it also really ties into this idea that we're going to introduce where Jade is the kind of like the heart of the group where, she represents their hope for the future and this like built-in sort of like it's this built-in weakness to one of the most formidable villains in the whole existence of this thing where and the weakness is based on caring about somebody. Like I think that that's really interesting and like this the villains in the narrative are like antithetical to that and Jade represents the counter to that, represents the existence of hope for the future and hope for something that's outside of the narrative framework that they're put in. So I think that maybe even like highlighting that a little more. I think it's pretty well established, but like to make sure that that's something that's pointed out.
I'm so sorry, this is jumping ahead so much, but I got this very funny idea. What if, Jade lands, and she's dog tier. So Vriska is thinking, I'm gonna put, Jade to sleep when she's Grimbark. But she can't, because Jade's part dog. You solve Grimbark some other way,
You have an actual reason
and
instead
then,
of it
like-
being mind control, you mean?
Yeah, I don't love that as a solution.
Right. We solve Grimbark some other way, and I'm so sorry that I'm so far ahead.
Not that far ahead.
And then, like, you know, you can take the load of the world off of Vriska's shoulders, because that needs to stop. Let her chill, and then Jade can kind of step in and, like, get everyone riled up after she finds her own way out of the Grimbarking, which maybe you can do with, like, in the dream space with Calliope.
Yeah,
Sorry, but yeah,
I
that's
really
all.
do like the idea
like
of
that.
Jade being the one that finds the way out of Grimbark. Like, I really like the idea of that being something that is her internal journey, rather than being something
I love
that's
that, yes.
Vriska based, because, like, Vriska's doing
Fuck
enough
Vriska.
already.
Sick
Fuck
of it.
Vriska.
I'm sick of this motherfucker.
We're all noted, several of us who definitely don't care about Vriska at all as a character. I am rolling my eyes sarcastically at that comment.
I love
I do.
Vriska. I just
She's a great character.
Yeah,
She's one of my favorite characters in the whole comic, and I think that we can't all be perfect.
Oh, you can't
Dav.
fool us.
I think that, like, I think that her role in the narrative, I think she needs to be, like, treated with a little bit more, like, care. But we're not talking about Vriska right now. I like the idea of that, having Jade be, like, have more volition in the future, and have this all tie together more in a way that feels a little, and not that it felt incoherent in the canon text, but to feel a little more connected.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so for the audience at home. This is sort of a 2-part special. We'll call it the Cascade special. I don't know if I'll remember that, but that's what it is from here until I forget. And so this is part 1. If there's something we haven't talked about conspicuously, it'll probably show up next time. Next time is going to be more focused on character stuff. That's why we've neglected talking about anyone but really Gamzee and Vriska in depth, or now Jade. And yeah, I don't know. We've been reading your comments on YouTube. Some of them are terrible, and you should be ashamed of yourselves.
Yeah.
Some of them are actually pretty good, and in depth, and I like that. Oh, my
Most
cats are
of
fighting.
them are good.
Most of
For
them
the
are
record.
good. Yeah, we've had a
Yeah,
couple
most of them are
of
good.
real stinkers, but most of them have actually been quite insightful.
A
Even
lot
the
of,
ones we don't necessarily agree with.
A lot of why does June have to be trans? I'm so mad. There's already Roxy, as if there can't be 2 trans characters in a
There
war.
can only be
got bad
one
news for you, buddy.
trans character. Don't you understand? That's how that works.
It's called tokenism, folks.
Yeah,
You're only allowed to have one.
Don't be reactionary. Like, let progressive, like, things be done with art, especially in a hypothetical
Yeah, like,
situation
we're-
like this one.
We are, in spite of our best efforts and most ardent desires, not able to destroy Canon Homestuck from existence. Like, it will continue to exist
Correct.
on Homestuck.com and in the Homestuck unofficial collection.
Well,
Not on Homestuck.com.
It'll-
It's,
It will
It'll
exist in some
quotes.
That horse is out of that
barn. Like, you
somewhere.
maybe we are getting our
Oh,
wish.
God.
Ooh.
Well,
Maybe you shouldn't mess with us. Perhaps.
yeah, that was me personally. I caused everything
Yeah.
that was post canon to happen. I did that. I'm sorry.
I got the 5 Infinity
Yeah.
Gauntlets and snapped my
Yeah,
fingers.
yeah, and JoJo also did that, which really didn't
Didn't
help.
help at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you could still engage with Canon Homestuck however you want to. It's just we don't want to engage with it in a way that makes us feel bad. So,
Yeah, fuck that.
fuck off.
The final thing I want to say is a couple people have asked, what form will this actual rewrite take? Like, once we're done with the podcast, what will the actual rewrite look like? My answer for now is I don't fucking know. I'm sorry. I wish I did. The soft answer is I'll probably have a website where it'll go up. There will be mirrors to, like, AO3 and YouTube. We'll probably do an audio fic as well, just in the spirit of podcasting. But that is not going to be for a while because we have all of Act 6 to cover, which is so we're probably at, I say very optimistically, the halfway point. It's probably more like the 1/3 way point, just because Act 6 is such a fucking beast, and there's so many goddamn characters. That's the thing about Act 6. That's how it gets you.
Story
Makes
full
you
of
read,
sound and carry
you know.
signifying nothing.
Yes. But that's the answer to that question. I'll have more concrete stuff as we go. Yeah, everyone fucking cool. Yeah,
We
and then I
have
dab.
giant-
I don't
I
have
lied. Unite
you guys have
Secret
anything
Thief
else?
is good.
Briscoe
We have
should
gigantic
die
brains,
and go to
that's all.
hell.
Yeah.
Yes, we
no.
do.
No,
Oh
we
god,
don't.
we're being
We don't think
canceled
that.
right now. We don't think that.
I hear this. Do you guys hear that? It's the sound of a million teenagers typing onto Twitter.
You have a very optimistic view of the current day Homestuck fandom, JoJo.
You can't get me if I don't log on.
I think I do. I think it's because I've pulled back so much since my Verscumentary days that now I only see people who I
That's
enjoy
fair.
talking to about this. So when I run into someone who's genuinely like, I don't like June, I'm like, what?
God,
What?
yeah, there's some
Shut up.
gross. There's some
It's
gross
alarming.
stuff out there I just don't like at all.
That's fine. To me, there's like 12 people in the Homestuck
Yeah, that's
fandom.
fair.
I only know half
Yeah.
of them.
I am just sitting on the bench of the Homestuck fandom from all times, just
That's
yelling
true.
in.
I'm I'm completely invested in the Hive Swap sub fandom at this point. This whole experiment is a favor to a friend. That's not
Yeah,
true.
I
I'm
think,
actually care about doing this. It's a lot of fun.
They didn't kidnap
Yes.
me and force me to do this
Yeah.
podcast. I am here of my own volition.
I'm
Let me
not
turn
making
the
a
next
sign
page.
with my hands.
And I enjoy being here.
I see you guys blinking Morse code. You can't fool me.
Like
Oh shit!
I had to learn Morse code to
Oh, shit,
understand what
Dirk
Serenity was
Strider
saying.
is my favorite character in all of Homestuck. Especially Alter.
I think that's all I got.
Sounds legit. This seems legit.
Where's the real chat? Anyway, that's it for this episode. The next episode will come out next week, but we're gonna be recording it in 2 days, so that'll be an interesting sort of time dilation. Everyone have a good one, except for Brisket. Have a bad one, Brisket. Alright, I'm gonna stop. Rewriting Homestuck is a podcast by JoJo McLovin, Janiah Riley, and Bucky Grant, hosted and produced by me, JoJo. Please follow the links in the description to each collaborator's Twitter and subscribe on YouTube. I'd like to thank my patrons for this month: Pyrate, Zipperozic, Kaleidoscope Mediator, Luna Skywalker Tucker, and Jojro. My Patreon can be found at patreon.com/funkmclovin. Have a great day.